Hello, welcome to another Access VFX podcast. This is an Access VFX podcast with a twist. We're all dialed in remotely, and this is taking place both on our YouTube feed and as you listen to it on the Access VFX podcast, wherever you listen to them. So we've come together mainly because due to recent events, a lot of careers events, whether it be the kind of global festivals like FMX, South by Southwest, or the more kind of UK-focused events like the VFX Festival, or the recent Big Bang Festival, all getting cancelled or rescheduled, we thought we would do our audience a service and support everybody who's trying to get into our industry by setting up a very specific podcast on careers advice. The kind of conversations you would have had if you attended any of these events, the information that you would get hold of, the connections you would get hold of. And we're sensitively talking, we're calling this workshop Standing Out While Staying In, which I think is quite apt. So how you can get on radar, get heard, show your work, make a bit of a groundswell of what you do within industry without leaving your home, assuming you're on lockdown somewhere. Very post-apocalyptic of me to say so. So it's about really just how you get on radar without leaving your house and how you do that. So we've assembled the great and the good of the Access VFX membership and across our network. So we have a number of people you may or may not recognize if you're watching this on YouTube. I'm Simon, by the way. I'm the host of the Access VFX podcast, founder and director of Access VFX, and I also work here at the Mill and support MPC. So would you like to introduce yourselves before we start, folks?
Yeah, sure. Yes. So I'm Katie from Blue Zoo Animation Studio, and I'm a recruitment and talent coordinator there.
Excellent. Thanks, Katie.
I'm Mark Flanagan from Epic Games, and I'm the education partner manager.
Thank you, Mark.
I'm Tobox from Blue Zoo, and also a non-executive director of Access VFX. I'm and chair of the Animation Skills Council and co-founder of Anim Dojo as well. I think that's the list, and help NextGen.
Thank you. Well, thanks.
Oh, you're
Phil,
mute.
You're on mute, Phil.
There we go. First technical hiccup of the day. Found the mute button. I'm Phil Attfield from NextGen Skills Academy. I'm the Visual Effects and Animation Partnership Director there. One of the things I do is assist lots of applications for apprenticeships.
Thanks, Phil.
Hi, I'm Paul Wilkes. I'm Global Head of Advertising Talent Acquisition, working across MPC and the Mill.
Thanks, Paul.
Hi, my name's Henry. I'm from Framestore, and I'm the Head of Recruitment for our film division.
Thank you, Henry.
Hi, I'm Leanne. I'm from Outpost VFX, and I'm Head of Talent.
Excellent. Thank you, Leanne. So to start on a positive note, it's important to get this out there that we're super lucky that as industry, as visual effects, animation and games, we are in a non-public facing industry compared to travel and hospitality. So that is something we need to, and obviously what we're going through at the moment is something we need to get through together. So we're here to help get people through that. And going through this episode, we hope we can provide the usual value, but equally and perhaps more importantly, help reassure a lot of worried people who probably already filled with anxiety before this current situation, the C word, came along, that things are going to be okay, right? Are we all agreed on that? We're going to get through this. We're going to hunker down. We're going to get through this. So my first question is, how do you make a great first impression without physically meeting somebody? That's my first question. So my celebrity squares here. So Mark Flanagan, what have you got?
My suggestion that actually worked for me is giving to the community. If you have something which you can teach, start teaching it on YouTube or some other way of doing it. Share what you have, and people will appreciate that. They'll see your skills. They'll also see that you're a good communicator and you're a good person. So that's a great way of doing it. That is probably what I built my career on.
Wow. Okay, that's a good start then. So Paul Wilkes, you were in second.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is more of a reassurance, really, that obviously, throughout the year we do attend physical events and meet people, but also the rest of the time we're receiving applications through digital means, and that makes up a large percentage of the applications that we deal with. So I think the first thing is for people to sort of rest assured that just because these physical events aren't happening, it doesn't mean that we're not reviewing candidates and still hiring people. So actually receiving an application through an email, through a LinkedIn message, or through a company website, a careers page, that's the normal run of the mill, and that's how we are reviewing candidates most of the time anyway. So I think we can focus some of the advice around improving your chances through those channels, but they're the channels that we recruit through anyway.
Okay, Leanne.
I'm also you're still receiving candidates in the same normal fashion, but I'm also looking at people's etiquette and professionalism on social channels around what's happening now. So being empathetic, being relatable, and being professional, really, and keeping it about the work, and rather than any out of topic things that might be being shared. So it's a fantastic opportunity to really have a level playing field and show your skills, but still be relatable.
Yeah, we talk a lot about soft skills, don't we, or professional skills at all of our events. And actually, is this not an amazing way to really refine your etiquette, as you said, Leanne, and your social etiquette? I mean, how do people reinforce that social etiquette? Because you're not meeting people, you're not shaking their hands, they don't hear your voice necessarily, unless, as Mark said, you're on YouTube. Henry?
I think it's always the number one thing of making sure that when you're contacting us, that you're contacting the right person and not putting at the top of your application. When they're applying for Framestore, they're not putting MPC or MIL or whatever like that. Really, that's always a 101. But I think it's starting with a conversation, really, rather than going in straight away and asking, can I have a job? When is or this? And just a direct kind of blunt message. It's asking about or talking about what your studio specifically does, or why they're interested in contacting us, or actually not just contacting us, but widening their berth and going to contact people within the studio. Artists are so up for talking about it because they've been through it and things, really, and trying to find new avenues into that as well.
That's interesting. Tom?
I was going to say, it's what you need to think of is showing how you can show you've got a genuine passion for doing it and a genuine desire. You want to do this, because we sometimes have people that apply for internships and they say, I've been asked to get an internship, can I have one? And that doesn't show the quite right attitude, where I'm sure you actually do want to, but just those phrasing that way kind of makes it look like you're reluctantly asking rather than because you generally want to, when you probably do generally want to. But those very subtle nuance of phrasing can really affect how a recruiter reads that email.
Cool. Katie, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of touch on the fact that we're all kind of discussing a similar thing of politeness in general and interest. So it kind of comes down to being polite, but also brave. So making that connection, but handling it in the right way really kind of communicates to us that you're the kind of applicant that we would be interested in. And that comes in kind of being aware of who you're talking to and how you're handling that conversation.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple down at the bottom, so I feel like I'm literally on a game show here. So Henry, I think you're first. Henry, build on that.
I just think, I forgot my trail of thought now.
And Julianne as well, don't worry.
Yeah, I think it is, the etiquette is really important. And I think as much as we're looking for some of the most highly skilled people in the industry to come on board and everything, most of these people are just accessing the industry right away. So we're not looking for the finished product. We're not looking for the beautiful shots from whatever blockbuster film. We're looking for somebody who shows some really great skill set, but also has those soft skills, which Katie touched on. It's about how you will portray yourself once you're in the studio. We want to make sure that you can communicate effectively, that you're polite. And there's so many little, as Tom said, nuances that come out of that. If you are polite and wait for our reply, it means that you're almost an adult and you can step forward and come and take on a real important job and everything. So it's looking at wider skills than just what you're good at.
Okay, Leanne, did you have something to build on that? Then we'll move.
Yeah, just quickly to add in there. When a candidate does their research, and especially can relate to something that maybe is happening at the moment in Outpost, for example, that shows them soft skills, where we're not at an event where you could have charisma to get to the front of that line to show you're real. You're really having balance and that time to be able to think, I can actually stand in at the back and do my research, could actually bring you to the front of the queue, as it were.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Paul, you're going to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what are the things that, we are trying to understand about a person when they're applying. And I think, it sort of ties into a lot of the things that people have said already. Is this person going to come into the studio and get on with not necessarily everyone, but most people? And, is the team going to enjoy working with them? What value can they bring? And it doesn't necessarily mean value in terms of churning out amazing shots from day one, but value in that person being in the studio. And also, are they going to learn? Are they going to grow? And are they going to progress their career and want to do that within our company? And those qualities, I think, whilst it can be difficult, if you can even just touch on those in any kind of written application, they're the sort of things that that are going to add a little bit more value to that first step.
I guess in many ways, I'm coming to you, Mark, is the I feel like it's Jeremy Paxman. I've gone from cheesy host to Jeremy Paxman. Is when you meet somebody physically, it's always in the moment, isn't it? Whereas, are we now giving everybody an opportunity to completely, even by doing this podcast, are we giving people the tools to completely refine and script the perfect introduction? Are we getting the genuine article, do you think, remotely?
I mean, that exists already, right? But actually people don't take it. They don't take it. That's the interesting thing. They don't take that opportunity.
Yeah, true. Mark, you're going to add to that.
Just something which I think a lot of people are doing remote interviews these days. And similar to everybody here is doing the right thing. You're all actually looking into the camera. But I've seen people who will be looking over here, or they'll be looking down here, on their phone, whatever it happens to be. So maintain contact, and the same way you would in real life. It makes a big difference. It is harder to relate to somebody across a screen, but it's not impossible.
And if you can do that across the screen, you'll nail it in person, right? And if you can nail anything remotely, the day-to-day is pretty easy. Tom?
I was just going to add on to that on the subject of doing kind of remote meetings. I think if you're doing an interview, then do kind of make sure you got the camera on, because it helps. It just helps that kind of that communication and reading each other's body language, because it's so hard to have a really fruitful conversation when you can't see the other person's face. So just do everything you can to, if you're doing an interview via video conferencing, to get that camera on, I think.
Yeah. And talking about kind of tech, so we started this conversation off with Mark talking about YouTube, and I know that we all have a strong presence on kind of LinkedIn as well. I mean, are there any other kind of great social channels that people should be thinking about engaging with, or tech, or video conferencing? Tom?
I think, I can't remember if we mentioned this in another podcast, but in terms of using Instagram, especially for more of the visual artists rather than more the technical artists, is making sure that if you're using Instagram to really promote your skills, which a lot of artists are really getting work from their Instagram feeds as well, to try and separate your work and personal accounts separately, because you don't want a recruiter to have to look through 10 images of a lovely coffee they've just received before they get to their artwork. So it's very good to think of itself as a personal marketing thing to get that job, rather than just randomly mixing your food and some nice ZBrush sculpting you've done recently.
Henry, you're going to add to that?
I just agree exactly, Tom. It's like, it is separating. It's not that we as recruiters will go stalking you on social media or anything, because I don't agree with that. But if you do say that you are interested in photography or something like that, there will be ever so often we'll go, oh, what type of photos are they taking then? And we'll look at their feeds and kind of go, oh, they've got great composition, etc., like that. So it is thinking about splitting it. If you are going to give links, or make it very accessible via your LinkedIn profile or whatever, just think about, well, if I am going to be using this as a professional kind of gateway as well, making sure those images are correct and everything. But yeah, it is a tricky one. ArtStation as well, obviously, for more kind of visual artists, etc., is a really nice platform to use as well, really.
Okay, so Leanne and then Paul.
Yeah, I just had on that as well, that you can use each of the social channels. So, use LinkedIn to share your ArtStation, hashtag correctly, and be quite clever with it. Link in your Twitter when you can, but 100% what Tom said, make sure that you separate out any personal Instagram feeds to professional, and it will help also form that character in a recruiter's eyes. the type of person you are.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, definitely. And Paul, you were going to add
Yeah,
something.
I mean, I was just going to say about sort of portfolio websites. You know, I think having had a little bit of experience with myself, using Wix or Squarespace or one of those, you know, there might be some cost even to a little bit and make things a little bit more professional.
Yeah.
But there's there's amazing templates, you know, choosing kind of modern clean fonts, you know, applying, obviously for artists, applying your visual design skills to a website is hugely important. You know, in some ways, if you can't do it or don't do it well, it's better to just go down the Vimeo route, or, you know, just use one of the more generic sites to show your work. But if you put in the effort and make a really nice, clean website, it can make a big difference.
And if you're a creative person, that should come out, shouldn't it, Phil?
Exactly.
Just building on what everyone else has been saying, yes, research is important, and making sure people don't wade through lots of stuff that isn't relevant. But the other thing that people could be doing is, seeing as we're not going to be getting to many events in the next few months, is they could be putting up a short clip of themselves introducing their portfolio or their reel, because that's a very quick way to get a sense of what someone's like, and you can rehearse it and go with it.
Tom?
It's more of a question really, because obviously we talked about the visual sides. If someone's more technical, if they're like an Unreal artist or a Python coder, I wanted to ask everyone here what they think is the best way of presenting their skills from that discipline.
Henry?
I just think it's possible to look at it more in a case study sense form, really. Especially if you're saying that I developed this gizmo for this or this tool for whatever. Turn it into a case study. Explain why you came about that reason for creating that, and what you did to then move forward with it. Why did you see that as a problem? Why hadn't you already looked at this or whatever? And then a discussion can easily come out of that as well, and actually make the interview sessions a lot easier. It gives a discussion point. It gets the interviewees ready to ask those questions. Well, haven't you thought about this, and it just kind of develops nicely, really. So yeah.
Start applying a bit of narrative to it, a bit of storytelling. That's nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leanne?
Also on that, to echo what Henry said, what's great to see, especially in this time where there might be a lot of people at home, maybe some proactive pulling teams together, creating projects, and then blogging about what you're doing so people can track it. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to ask another question about this kind of area, about engaging through various social channels. And we do have some questions from the socials. So we put this out on Friday and over the weekend, and we've gathered a few questions from our audience as well, which is important we get those out as we've committed to them. But my last question around engaging with the actual social channels themselves is what's the etiquette around directly messaging people on social channels? So a direct message to you on LinkedIn, for example. What's the kind of broad etiquette? I know it's something we've spoken about at previous events, but I think it's even more important to talk about it now. Leanne?
I get so many LinkedIn messages, as I appreciate everybody must do, but the ones that really stand out to me is the personal ones that are very real and can maybe start with a shorter question and a statement rather than going in on your full pitch straight off. You know, hi, how are you? I've noticed this about Outpost. Do you mind if I ask you some more questions? And then go through things like that. So I think that is a great intro, really.
Okay, what about you, Paul?
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually leading up to this call, I was making some notes about LinkedIn and how people have been successful in kind of introducing themselves, and it actually was exactly that point. I think, you know, you have to think about it slightly different, but also in parallel with how a physical kind of relationship where you meet someone at an event and you say hi, you get to know them, you know their name, you recognize their face, and then, you know, you don't offer them a job at the end of that first meeting. Quite often, particularly if they're a recent or graduate or an undergraduate, that might be start of a 3 or 4 different points of contact that then gradually lead towards a job. And so there's a kind of digital equivalent of that. An intro, just sending someone a connection request, saying hi and thanks for connecting is the start. And then, you know, maybe somewhere in the near future, share a bit of work, ask a question, and kind of build a relationship in that way.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Henry?
So yeah, to just go on Paul's, really, it is taking those steps to it. It's showing that you've gone through the other means as well. If you are applying for a job, apply for the job first. It's not thinking that's the route to apply for a job. It's starting that conversation organic. You go, hey, look, I just applied for X role. I just wanted to ask a few simple questions about it. And it's just like you're having a conversation face to face, over video call, or just as you are on LinkedIn. It's just making it a lot easier and accessible, and not using, maybe just a tip to some people, LinkedIn is not a DM, it's not a direct messaging service. If starting a message just going hi doesn't get you anywhere really. That kind of throws me a little bit.
It's a bit about weird.
Kind of it is a bit weird. It's coming, letting us go, okay, right, that's what you want, that's the key information you want to get out of us. But also you want to come across as a human being, really.
Katie, you're going to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about that kind of idea of demanding, trying to move between genuine interest and sounding like you're demanding something, because that's something when everyone's super busy in the industry, we're really interested in people who are interested in the studio, but what we're not necessarily interested in is people who are demanding our time rather than kind of like politely asking for it. And I think a lot of people, when they can communicate that they have a genuine interest in the work that they do, the work that you do as a studio, that's always the kind of touchstone of, oh, we have that in common because I'm also interested in what my studio does. So we can talk about that, and I'm happy to answer your questions from that side. Whereas a demand of, I would like this job, it never reads well. It doesn't read well for you, and it doesn't inspire us to continue that conversation either.
If that happens in real life, it's as much a turn off as it is on LinkedIn, right? Ultimately, we're here to build a relationship, so it's applying that, isn't it, from what I'm hearing? Exactly. Mark, you were going to add to that.
One thing I think is really important is to use the same channel for communication all the time. Quite often I've had people who, not in my current role, but in other places, have applied for a job, and then they've contacted me the next week on LinkedIn, and then somehow they found me on Facebook, and then they're on Twitter. So keep it on one channel of communication, whatever it happens to be. I mean, I don't mind people contacting and dealing with me through LinkedIn most of the time. That's okay. I've done that. I think that's okay. But if you're actually using 3 or 4 different ways of communicating, it's really hard for people to manage their relationships with clients. The other thing I think, which I particularly like, is if you can get somebody to introduce you, that actually helps. If you have a friend of a friend who knows the person, I like that still. If you haven't met the person physically, that to me is a really good thing to start with.
Really vouches for that person. Tom, you were next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if anyone's unsure of the best way of dealing with it, I think if you imagine you're in a kind of physical kind of location and you're at a festival, or if you're even over the pub, and think if you were to keep on using LinkedIn the same way as walking over to someone and following them around and rather than waiting for them to reply, I think that might be an easy way of gauging if it might come across as a little bit over the top. But it's, you know, you do need to, it's a very careful balance of reaching out to people rather than overreaching out.
Okay, so Leanne, you had your sign up.
I did, yeah, and it was just basically there what Tom was saying. I've had conversations absolutely fine on LinkedIn, even Twitter, because I use that in professional capacity. But I have had requests come through on my personal Instagram, which is very private and locked off, and it's like instantly like, oh,
it's a bit,
you wouldn't knock on that person's front door, would you? It is. It's that attitude.
It is the equivalent of knocking on your front door, isn't it? Some weirdo standing in the garden or something. Katie, you had your sign. I know it's a really creepy analogy. It's going to keep you awake tonight.
I was just going to say, and this is something to take with a pinch of salt for anybody who's listening, but I'm not afraid of a very polite, well-timed nudge. Because we're all human and we're all extremely busy, and there's people who I am interested in speaking to, but there's a million other things that we also are doing in our day-to-day job. So I don't mind a polite nudge, but it does have to be well timed. So not necessarily like 4 hours later or a day later. I would kind of say like at least like if you've contacted me on a Monday, maybe wait till the Friday.
That's all right. Yeah, exactly.
On that, yeah.
Yeah, there's the balance between well timed and just relentless. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I had Tom and then Phil. I'm going down the grid. So the Celebrity Square, below Katie.
I was just going to add to what Katie is saying as an example, if people are wondering what that border is, an example of what that line to cross is. An example someone did to me a few years ago when they were nudging me was, rather than just saying, appreciate you're very busy, whenever you got a chance, please I'd love to hear back from you. They just forwarded me the same email again with nothing in it. And they did that about 5 times, and I just muted the person because I felt it wasn't the best way of approaching someone. Because that's if someone basically does that, it's kind of like tapping on your head instead of speaking to you, and to recruiter that says what they might be like in the studio, kind of in their communication style. So bear that in mind.
That's interesting. And Phil, you had a point to raise.
Yeah, it was just around. When people ask a question, that's to get a conversation going. But be careful what you ask. If you just ask, tell me about work at Blue Zoo or Framestore or wherever, it's a bit general. I mean, I get lots of people saying, I want to know about apprenticeships, and I really don't know where to begin.
No idea.
So try and do some research around the companies beforehand. And if you think they're offering internship programs, ask a relevant question, like when do they start?
Yeah, just specifics.
Anything, yeah.
Katie?
Specific.
I was just going to carry on from what Phil was saying, because I would always try and avoid asking a question of someone that's easily Googleable, if that's a word.
Yeah, kind of do the research you can do, and then
yeah, like we'll get asked, when do your internships start, and it's like, well, every one of our social media has just posted out the dates for our internship, and tell me about the studio, and every studio has a website full of information and social media channels that's dedicated to kind of highlighting that. So it also kind of communicates like a lack of interest, and also like you're unobservant almost.
Yeah, good. Well, that was a very good question, wasn't it? I mean, I'm quite happy with that question. Made that one myself, and that went on for about 20 minutes. So thank you. Great stuff, guys. Good job. This is working, right? I'm liking this. I could get used to this grid thing. It's cool.
We might have to.
I know, right? Right, so I'm going to move on to some of the questions we received on our social channels over the weekend. The first question I've got is from Vanessa Schneider, who came through Twitter, and she asked about cover letters. So it's along the same lines around kind of introductions, but kind of the old school career cover letter. And the question is about the cover letter. The part about why I want to be an animator is basically always the same. Should I rewrite the cover letter entirely for every studio, or is it fine to keep the motivation part the same and only change the part about why I want to work in the studio? It's a nice long question, Leanne.
I used to work at Aardman Animation, so dealt with a lot more animators than I do now, and it would always depend on the length of this cover letter and what age we date back to, because I had everything from when I was 2 and saw my first Disney, and then that inspired me, and we go through a chronological date to now. It's just epic to read back. Maybe just like reference one thing in there and keep it to a short paragraph, really, or 2 at most, really. A cover letter, cover email, less is more, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with saying, sorry, was that me? There's nothing wrong with saying what inspired you and what got you into animation in the first place, but try and keep it into context and remember somebody's skimming as quick as possible.
Yeah, that's very true, actually. Paul, you had your logo up and moved to Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think of course there is going to be a portion of that covering letter that is going to be the same, because if it's genuine and it's kind of real about the person, then that's the truth. I think as we've already said, it's hugely important that it's wrapped around by a more personalized message to the person or the studio. Short and sweet, absolutely. But I think the most important thing is that it's relevant to the company or the job that you're sending it to, generic or otherwise. If it doesn't make any sense that you're saying you want to work in feature animation and you send your application to a VFX studio, then you've totally missed the point. So, it doesn't matter if you're saying the same thing to different companies, as long as those companies are the right people to be receiving that message, if that makes sense.
Okay. Tom, you had a point to make.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're applying to lots of studios and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to write, all these different cover letters, I think the sensible way of approaching it might be to kind of group them into different disciplines. So if you're an animator, you might want to write one cover letter that's more about doing kind of cartoony animation, or if you're applying to a VFX studio, you can adapt that letter to be more kind of creature VFX style animation, and then just very slightly tweak the introduction words in terms of the studio name and maybe a project that you aspire to work on. And that's a very simple way of making letters that relate to each studio but not having to rewrite a letter every single time.
Brilliant. Katie?
Yeah, I was gonna also say that we won't know if it's the same anyway. So as long as you put the right studio at the top and the right studio information in, that's a resource that you've created. You will use the same shots for your show reels that you create if they are the right ones. So if it's the right text that describes you, we won't know that that's copied as long as you, again, show relevant interest to that studio and change that part. We will never know anyway. So it's how you want to work smart instead of hard, but just make sure that you're paying attention to details.
I was going to say, stay switched on when you're copying and pasting. Henry, you were going to throw in something, and then we'll move to Mark.
Yeah, it's not going to, I just want to say, it's not going to hurt our feelings knowing that you're applying for other studios. We know that you want a job in the industry. We understand that there's going to be similar letters going out to every other place. It is about putting that key information, as Paul said, wrapping around why Framestore may be the place you want to go, or Bluesy or wherever. But it's also just, it's about moving forwards and us then getting it in front of you in front of us, and having that further conversation about why our work specifically is important. But it's just giving us those key facts, not making it huge like a autobiography or whatever. It's just getting those few key points to us and going, okay, cool, you're really into this, you really want to work in the industry. Hopefully our studio is your preferred, but we also understand that you're applying in other places as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. Mark?
A couple of things with cover letters that I've found useful in the past for myself. The first thing is, think about who's reading it and read it yourself, imagining you are that person. Edit it, take out as much as you possibly can, still leaving your message in there. I have a terrible tendency when I'm writing to put in words like really or very, or a lot of words that don't really need to be there, and I can actually write it better. So go back, read it yourself, and then before you send it, get somebody else to read it and tell them who it's going to, and say, imagine you're that person. Can you put yourself in that position? Again, one of the things which I find is really useful is if you're writing a letter and you're looking for a job, if you can put yourself, make the person reading that letter see you in that position. Say, as somebody who is interested in this particular role, I would bring this to it, and I would love to be working on this film, doing these things. And if you can do that, it's part of selling yourself to them. Let them imagine you actually sitting at a desk in their studio, doing that job, working with their team.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to stick with Vanessa, because she also asked another really good question, which kind of relates. So she says, is it appropriate to reach out to a recruiter directly after my graduation, or should I only apply on posted job offers? And also, is it okay to put a photo on my CV/resume? Henry?
I don't really agree with the photo thing.
I
don't agree with it. I just don't feel you need it at all. I had this conversation with somebody from another industry recently about which they sent me their CV to have a look through and everything. And I was like, why have you included a photo in it? And it's like, oh, it's something we've always done. It's like, I can't understand it. It shouldn't matter what you look like, really. I think it's just more important about the substance to do with your reel, your cover letter, etc., like that, to tell the truth. Obviously, this year we're not going to be able to. Well, hopefully, we can still get some grad shows in a month or two's time. So I understand students this year, especially, wanting to reach out to us more, and we'll be very aware of that this year and everything. And I think something we're going to try and do at Framestore is trying to do more conference calls with graduating schools or groups of students, just to be like, hey, this is the opportunities we've got, etc. Really, but the photo thing, no, I don't think it at all. I hope everybody else feels the same.
Okay, Leanne, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, 100% agree. It doesn't matter what you look like. Don't stress yourself out with that picture as well. You know, if you've got, make sure you've got links to your LinkedIn. Make sure the picture that is on your LinkedIn is of yourself and not a statement or whatever. I've seen all sorts, or a box. But also reach out, and to go back to our previous point, was start building those relationships slowly and naturally and organically. So just it's absolutely fine. Just do it in the right way.
It's not about how handsome you are, right? I mean,
No.
yeah. So clearly you're very handsome. Let's move on to the next question. Speaking of handsome, Katie, you are next.
Thank you for that intro.
It's all right.
So I definitely agree with what Henry and Leanne have been saying, especially about the photo. It doesn't matter. In terms of contacting people, we usually, because of schedules, know a couple of months in advance that we're going to be hiring for people because we have to plan for it. But we don't necessarily post those applications until the correct time when we're going to get sufficient interest with people's availability. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with necessarily being ahead of the curve, that we're already someone that we might kind of like have in mind for that future role. And then you're immediately in that list of people to consider right from the get-go before the application's even open. So, and you also never know what could be coming up short term. Lots of things change in a studio quite rapidly. We're constantly evolving for every project and every team. So I think that there's nothing wrong with taking your chances and putting yourself out there, because you never know what that opportunity might bring.
Paul, you're going to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, very similar. I mean, you know, sometimes we just don't know what's happening next week, never mind next month. So, you know, the process of getting a job, and particularly your first job, I think a lot of it comes down to timing. You know, there is an element of luck. Obviously, you have to put yourself in the right place at the right time. But, you know, I think, as we've already said, you know, following the sort of etiquette and protocols of connecting with people, continuing to keep in contact with them over a period of time and making that relationship kind of meaningful and build. The hope is that throughout all of that contact with people, you know, you're gonna hit the jackpot at some point and get the timing right. You know, sometimes companies don't actually even advertise their junior roles because they're so inundated with applications that it's just not a practical way of doing that sort of recruitment. And what they have, you know, and this is the thing that people need to put themselves into that group, is they probably have a pool of hungry, enthusiastic graduates or recent graduates that have already made contact with the company, are building relationships with the recruiters or the artists even, that the companies can draw from. And so you need to put yourself into that group and maintain those relationships. You know, as Mark said, you know, selling yourself, I mean, it's actually, you're following the same kind of patterns that you would as a salesperson. You know, you have a list of companies that you're interested in, you identify the contacts, you schedule when the next time you're going to get in touch with them and what you're going to say to them. You know, you can take a very kind of methodical approach to it and build it in that way, I think.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So I'm going to move on to the next question now, because I'm aware of time. We've got a lot to get through. So on Facebook, we had a few questions from Carrie Alice, who asked some really good ones. So much like Vanessa, who asked the last bunch, I'm going to ask hers as well, because they're worth it. Her first question is, in modelling and generalist showreels, what software do you look for to be demonstrated, particularly at entry level? Let's take that one. Leanne.
Okay, so obviously, hopefully you've been taught industry standard at wherever you've been studying, or hobbyists. So MEA for generalism, and was it modelling, was it?
It is modelling and generalist, modelling, yeah.
Cool, yeah, so ZBrush, experimentation, even Blender, you know, it's and how you've progressed that. And do your research as well, and it could be start of the conversations of, you know, speaking to the recruiter, what software do your company use, and how you can relate to that in any message there. So I would say hopefully that you've been educated enough to what companies are using, but being proactive as well.
Thanks, Leanne. Mark?
I've worked across various different software programs, various different industries. I will say the software you use is really not as important as how good the quality of your work is. So include meshes, include, you know, your polygon flow. Make sure that you're showing things that are, if you're a generalist, that you can do UV mapping as well. It's still part of the workflow for a lot of people. Say what software you have used. Say if you actually have based it on somebody else's work. even in some cases, worthwhile showing your reference and your final piece. I don't think anybody's not going to get a job because they've used a particular piece of software. I have retrained myself across everything, and you can do.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Henry, you had a point to make.
Yeah, I'll just kind of follow on from what Mark was saying, is that, yeah, it's great to have very relevant experience in the tools that we use, such as Maya, etc., like that. But a lot of studios are using so many different bespoke tools these days and their own bespoke softwares. Like Framestore, we have our own bespoke softwares. I know DNEG have started using a very different tool to NPC and Framestore and stuff like that. So it is about thinking about how your skills are relevant, that your portfolio looks good, and then how it's actually our job to think about, right, your work is fantastic. How can we adapt that, or take into mind, if we're hurrying you, how long it'll take for you to get up to speed, which shouldn't be too long, and then to move forward. You could actually bring something different to the team, and you could bring a new way of thinking of it. So don't fret too much. It's about the actual end product that kind of looks like.
Thanks, Henry. Paul?
Oh, just to be controversial, I would disagree a little bit. I think that in certain environments, and thinking about the advertising studios that I work for, we have a very small number of junior and entry level positions, and so when we're looking at those pool of candidates, it's natural that, everything else being equal, we're going to hire someone that's got the relevant software skills for our studio, because we don't have a large structured environment for juniors to come in and learn for weeks before they can be productive. In most cases they need to hit the ground jogging at least, and so that those relevant software skills can be important for certain companies. And I think, again, it's just about understanding a little bit about the businesses that you're applying for, and the working environments that you're going into, and those things you can establish actually even while you're studying, and reaching out to people and gaining that information.
Okay, thanks, Paul. So I'm going to come back to Kerry's questions. She's got a couple, but I've got a question here from Nellie Luckett, also through Facebook, which talks about portfolio and reels, and I had my own question around this as well. But Nellie's question is, as someone who is graduating this year, how do I make my portfolio stand out from other graduates? And I guess this goes for any walk of life. It doesn't have to be somebody who's graduated from uni necessarily. But her question is, are there any pitfalls she should avoid? Assuming Nellie is a female, it might be them. Mark?
One of the things I've seen time and again is a particular university, any of the universities, just pick them. You'll have a project that everybody in the class does, and it could be a medieval warrior, and you get 300 different copies of medieval warriors that look really the same. Try and find something which is relevant to the studio you're applying for. So if you're applying to, say, a company like Framestore, obviously there's a lot of fantastic creature work. If you're doing stuff for a studio which is renowned for environments, apply with really good environment work. And some of your own personal projects can actually make a big difference. Stuff which wasn't a university project. I know it's something you're going to have to take time on again. Yeah. Another thing which is really great for everybody to have is how long this thing took for you to do. Because it's great that you can do a really nice quality piece of work, but if it's taking you 6 months to do, and you'll have a week to do it in a studio, it's important to know that.
It kind of loops back to Henry's point around providing some narrative, some case study behind the work, right? Not just showing the work. Tom, did you have your logo up while I had my head down? No, cool, just checking. Don't like to leave anyone out in the spirit of inclusivity. Okay, any other point, anybody else on slide on reels? Okay, so Paul, then Katie.
Sorry. Just a quick one. I mean, I think this has been said many times, but it's you have to be sort of totally brutal about the quality of the work that's in your portfolio, and there is really no room for anything that's subpar. It has to be your very, very best work, because you really do get kind of one hit at it. That first look of a recruiter or a head of department or a lead artist, and you just need to make sure it's your very, very best work only.
Yeah, I front load it. Katie, you had a point on this.
Exactly what Paul said.
Exactly the same. What he said.
Yeah, just
Henry. Oh, sorry. Okay. All over the syllabus squares. Henry.
It is just taking those 101 steps of showreels of don't overload it with all of the work that you've done for the last 2-3 years. Don't worry about that. Just give us your top 2 or 3 pieces of work, even if that only makes the reel 30 seconds long. Just make sure that you hit us in the face with your best piece of work and lets us understand about what you want to do. And then when we can kind of dig a bit deeper, tell us how he did it. How long did it take? Because that's what Mark said. We do want to know how long it takes. It's going to be the first question we're going to ask you. Go, oh, that's awesome. How long did that take? 2 years? All right. Maybe not. Yeah.
Brilliant. Leanne?
Yeah, as well, I would say, same way that Mark mentioned, to read your cover letter back, re-watch your showreel, show it to your friends and family, show it to colleagues, show it as work in progress, ask for feedback, because you have to be harsh and imagine you're a recruiter or any lead artist watching this reel for the first time.
Okay, Mark.
The old expression to kill your darlings, even though it's something you did 2 years ago and you thought it was great when you did it 2 years ago, it's 2 years old work. And if you don't have better work than that today, think about making some. Yeah. The other thing is, anything that you would be ever tempted to make an excuse for has to go. Because if somebody asks you a question about a piece of work and you say, well, I could have done it better if, that is a red flag which you can't get past.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, guys. Oh, Tom, you've got some final words there?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, where we've also said you can always caveat that. So, for example, with sculpture and in terms of the time that people take to do something, if you haven't got much, but you want to do some speed sculpts, do some speed sculpts, but say this is a 20-minute, 1 hour speed sculpt, and then that kind of does caveat it taking long to do, but that allows you to build some stuff up in your showreel and say, I made this in an hour. Imagine if you gave me a week what I could do, kind of thing.
One quick one as well, sketches. I love sketches. I love sketches. Your workings, put some of those in.
Okay, so if you're planning to have big games, get your sketchbooks out. Yeah, layout pads, all that good stuff. I'm going to move back to Kerry, because she had a really interesting question, actually, on the back of your points, Mark. She asks, assuming it's a she, or she's a she, go on, dig, right, edit out in post-production, Tom, please. If you studied animation for film and TV, how hard is it to work in games and transfer those skills?
Okay, I suppose I should jump in here because I've done a bit of both.
I'm looking at your square here.
I thought you were. I could feel your eyes boring into me. It's not that difficult. There are slight differences. The differences are that you can't actually have a pose which is a silhouette from a particular view, which works just from that view. You've got to think about how it works across the whole potential view. The general mechanics you learn about animation are usable across it all. There are some extra things which you'll bolt on to doing stuff in games. As well, in games, you'll generally make a library of animations which will link together with blends. So you'll have a walk cycle going to a run going to a jump going to a landing going to an idle, all these kind of trees. So it's a way of thinking, and also you've got to think that it's not just creating one pose which works beautifully from here. Like I've got a great silhouette. You think about what that looks like from here when I turn it around and everything's muddled. So 90% the same, but when you're working for games, actually do that test, put it in the game and walk around it and see how it works.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I've got two, please, Paul.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that, I mean, just from a sort of kind of a recruitment point of view, I think we don't see as much movement backwards and forwards between the two industries as lots of people would expect. I think that, quite often at the early stages of people's career, when they're finding their feet, they might find that they get to a, step between the two. And then maybe much later in their career, when they become a much more senior artist, there's opportunities to move. But actually, as people are developing their career, because, this takes a lot of time and investment, and energy in a particular route, I certainly we don't see people kind of hopping backwards and forwards between games and VFX. And I think deciding where you want to be is an important part of this process, really.
Henry.
I think we're going to see so much more movement between the industry, though, as we see it progressing into this whole real-time gaming engine world. Actually, if anything, in VFX, I want people to move across into VFX, because especially with virtual production, things like that, I want that knowledge in VFX, because it's really hard to teach people already working in it and kind of change their way of thinking. So it's actually quite exciting with all of that. And so yeah, just moving forward, I think there is great opportunities across both areas now.
Thanks, Henry. Tom.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. I was just going to say, I think you can also, if you are working in games and you want to work to VFX, you can kind of sell yourself by looking at the differences between the industries. Where in games you have to work in an extremely optimized way, whether it's poly count, textures. So you could actually go to a VFX or animation studio and say, look, I can work in a very optimized way because that's the way I've been trained to think, which kind of might put you against someone else who hasn't even thought about that. So think about what the differences are between those industries and try and sell those as a positive.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. Phil?
Just a bit of a crib sheet that's going to be coming out in the next few months for anyone who wants to be an aspiring animator, either in VFX or animation or games. The Junior Animator Apprenticeship Standard is published, which it's not a route in for anyone who's a graduate, but what it does do is it shows you the kind of things that someone who's an entry level is going to have to be competent at. So they've been standardized across 4 pathways, I think. And one of those is meant to be around games or virtual production. So there's something to look out for anyone who's looking to get in. It's been sort of codified, the kind of things you're going to have to do in different jobs. Go have a look for them.
To know. Thanks, Phil.
The Institute for Apprenticeship and Technical Education website.
Cool. Thank you, Phil. So I've got 2 quick questions to ask that I hope will be quite quick answers as well, because I want to cover all of the audience questions, for want of a better term. And these are Instagram, so they've got funny names, so I'll probably get them wrong. So the first one is from, or the second one is from Flow_rearend. I don't know. Flow on Instagram. Says, do you prefer applicants? And this made me laugh a bit. I don't really know what he or she means. Do you prefer applicants who already live on site? I think they mean country, not in your building somewhere in the basement. But Leanne.
I'd love it if an applicant lived on my site, just under the desk.
Convenient, wouldn't
so
it?
Easy.
Just come upstairs, come on. Yeah.
But that's really tricky, isn't it? Especially with the B word that's coming up. But I mean, for speaking on behalf of my studio, who's slightly smaller than some of the big guys, we have very tight turnarounds, and some trying to schedule something 1 week, 2 weeks before not even knowing about it. So it's not really about where they live, but it's how accessible and how quickly you can move to get here. We're regional as well, you know. So that would just make my life easier and my team's life easier. So I think that's what you have to think about.
Okay, Henry, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I just think it's about finding the best talent for the shows and productions that we're working on. Really, it's giving those opportunities to everybody. I don't want to talk about the B word, but that at the moment, like, we just want to continue crewing across the world. We're still bringing people from every corners of the world. So it's just showing us why you feel that you're the right person for that opportunity. It is trickier at the junior level, but it's always been tricky on the junior level if you're talking about visas and stuff like that. But across the more European states and everything, it's fine. We just want to give those opportunities to the best people.
Okay, so Paul, you were next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously, look, we're in the throes of investigating remote working and all different scenarios right now. But the experience that we had at NPC has been that people that have worked remotely for us typically are people that have worked with us previously in the studio and have built up the relationships with the team, with the producers. And so there's a level of trust there. I think it's very difficult to consider working with someone, particularly, maybe someone at a more junior level, on a remote basis straight away, just because of the kind of the team working environment around the projects. I mean, there's certainly some disciplines, concept art, where you can send someone a brief and then the results come back, and that works very well. But I think right now in the heat of kind of production, when you're on a project, it can be tricky unless those kind of relationships and trust have been built up already.
Yeah, thank you. Tom?
I was going to say I've had 2 things, if I can remember them. The first was on the more the remote side, and if you are an artist and you're wanting to remote work for a studio as a freelancer you haven't worked at before, I think look at it from their perspective, because the biggest barrier will be the trust issue, which is why you kind of use artists you worked with before. And the trust issue will generally be around the quality of work in the amount of time they have, and trusting that communication will work effectively. If you're going to be responsive to emails, if you're going to, not kind of kick back with what you think is a better way of doing a creative decision. So I think if you think of when you're applying for a job, how you can caveat those in terms of maybe it's a peer recommendation or anything like that. And then in terms of the question on the locality of it, I think any studio's going to struggle to bring someone in from overseas if they're at a junior level, just because the costs involved, and that means there's more risk, so they're only going to really save that cost for the higher seniors. So I think it's much better to start off in your industry with local studios until you've got that experience where you can demonstrate why studios should pay thousands of pounds for a visa to bring you in. So I think if you try and look at it from the studio's perspective and what their barriers are, you'll stand a much higher chance, because you'll be able to think about how to caveat those or show why you've thought about them.
Thank you, Tom. Mark, you had your phone up, and then we'll go to Henry.
Sorry, that's my next meeting coming up shortly. So two things. I have actually worked around the world. I've worked in Australia. I've been brought over there to work, and I've worked in Vancouver again, which was fantastic. Be certain that the company you're applying for can actually get you a visa, because sometimes it's difficult for them. They have a limited number of them, and it may be necessary for you to try and get your own visa. There are ways of doing that, depending on where you're from and where you're going to. So just be aware that it may not be they don't want you. It may be that it's really very hard for them to get you. Second thing is about remote working is not everybody is good at remote working, and make sure you can actually remote work yourself. It's different doing your own personal work, which you might put in, say, 20 hours a week when you feel like doing some work in your own studio, which is fine. But then when you have deadlines to hit and your machine may not be up to par, your internet connection may not be up to par, make sure if you're putting yourself up for that place to work remotely, that you can actually do it as well as you would like to.
Thank you. And Henry, you had a point to make on this as well?
Oh yeah, Mark actually just covered both of them. But it is about, because I think predominantly we're talking to quite a lot of junior people today, and it is about thinking about those youth mobility visas and things like that. Like with UK is very accessible with youth mobility visas and things. So if you've already got that and you can show that you can come and work here, that's fantastic. That's also shown that you're using your initiative and you're thinking about what do I need to do to get that opportunity at that studio and everything. And also just on remote working, it's just going to be fascinating to see what happens over these coming month or two, to see how that does change. I know, especially Framestore, the big clients are very, very conscious about material being shared off site and everything like that. But it's going to be really interesting to see how this changes the fashion that we take on work, really. So
thank you, Henry. So I'm aware of people's time. Please don't leave just yet. I'm going to wrap up shortly, but I want to ask the final question from our audience, which should be a pretty simple yes or no, is from Celine Carriou on Instagram. Is it possible to get an internship without being a student? Yes. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, but I'm going to start to wrap it up now. This is where the patter comes in to kind of start to bring the episode to a close. And my first kind of point or comment to make is thank you, all of you, for giving up an hour and a little bit of your time. I know you're really busy. For anybody watching on YouTube, Mark has always had that majestic beard. He hasn't grown it while he's been in isolation in the underground bunker that he's in at the moment. Sorry, bad taste.
It's okay. No. Thank you for calling it majestic.
It is majestic. It is majestic. So, and also, I've had a very easy job because I'm used to doing the kind of guided kind of conversation on these podcast episodes, and really, I just said people's names to keep the conversation going. I was like Tom, Paul, Mark, etc. So, thank you for making my job super easy. I wanted to finish on one kind of comment that I would ask you to comment on as our guests is. The benefit of the Access VFX e-mentoring program. We push it all the time, being a value add, an opportunity to continue your conversation after you've met people. And I think it's more important than ever to build both the mentorship in terms of getting industry mentors on board, but also if you want to get yourself a mentor, sign up now. Tom.
I was going to say, if you're going to take any positives from where we're at the moment, is if you are having to stay at home for a long time, then that can be of great use to practice your work, but then if you can get a mentor to help you during that time, and equally if you're someone with experience in the industry and you find yourself with lots of time on your hands, then please donate that time as a mentor to help someone else, because there's an ideal way of making the most of not a great situation.
Leanne.
I would also say, if there's any potential mentors watching this as well, sign up. We've seen huge advancements in confidence build with the mentors that we've got at Outpost, and it's actually doing the job both ways, which is fantastic. And I think, what Tom says, during this time, it could be a two-way street to help people.
Thank you, Leanne. Paul.
Yeah, I was going to, I think one of the things that a mentee can learn from a mentor, and hopefully the mentors can give this advice, is to start building that knowledge of the etiquette and the approach that you need. You're communicating with an industry professional, so what a great way to learn how to approach other industry professionals when you get to the point that you're looking for a job.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. And Henry, you had your hand up.
I think it just perfectly translates to a mentee has become an employee at Framestore and now is a mentor, and that's perfect example of it working. Ooh, and yeah, I'll leave that there.
Amazing. No, thank you, Henry. So does anybody have any final words before we bring it up? Because I know there's so much conversation to be had. I think we could go another hour. I've got more questions, but time is of the essence. But is there anything anybody else wants to add that we haven't covered? Do you think we've nailed it? Or is there anything else? Tom?
All I was going to say was, if you see that lots of things are being put on pause, we're continuing to recruit. So don't be worried about thinking people aren't going to see your Showreel stuff. And just because you can't see it visibly continuing, it is all continuing just in people's home office bedrooms or wherever. So don't worry about
life goes on.
Getting a job might be delayed. We're all still working full tilt.
Exactly.
We still need you.
We need you, exactly. But it is, and life, and we've got this, right? I mean, this will blow over. It's gonna be all right, everyone. All right, anybody who's listening, share this, because seriously, that was incredible. The amount of rich information we got through in an hour. That's bonkers, the amount of stuff that came out of that. So you guys rock, and this is all good, man.
And it shows you remote working works. We're all having a good conversation.
We never have to meet each other ever again. I mean, as much as I love you guys, that's it now. This is our relationship. But you're right, absolutely right. I mean, it's for me, it's forced us into more creative ways of working, and long may they continue. But I love you guys. I'd love to see you again in the flesh. If I get to shake your hand, all of you, once all this blows over, give you a fist bump opportunity.
All right,
guys, thank you so much. And anybody listening to this, please share, listen, subscribe, support the podcast. It's really important.
And sign up on the website for mentors.
Yep. Yes. accessvfx.org/mentors.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Cheers.
Stay healthy.
Afternoon.
Bye.
Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.